Okay, welcome everyone to Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon. Thank you for attending, and we hope you're having a great conference. I'd like to introduce Paul Woods. Paul will be presenting a session, Work-Life Borders in a World Where Work is in the Middle of Your Life. And, take it away, Paul.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. Really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone for joining the session today. As I said, my name is Paul Woods. I'm the founder of Adopt and Embrace, and really looking forward to spending the next 45 to 50 minutes with you all to share a topic with you that's near and dear to my heart and near and dear to all of our hearts recently, which is how do we make this work-life thing actually work when we've been forced to work within our home. I'll share lots of stories and lots of research and lots of things along the way. Hopefully, you'll walk away from the session with lots of great ideas that you can implement, tactics you can implement in your own personal lives in terms of how you can manage these borders between work and life, and also how you can engage with your peers in your organisation as well to share as well. Just before I get into it, I just want to acknowledge a few things. So obviously the sponsors that are sponsoring the event today, thank you to them for sponsoring the event. And also, if you wanted to win some prizes, some great prizes available as part of the Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon as well. And I think this is the best part of it. The sponsors, a lot of the money from the sponsors going towards some really great charities here as well to support people that are in need, which is great to see. So let's get into the session proper. As said, my name is Paul Woods, and this session is really a culmination of about 8 years worth of research that I did. So just recently I graduated from a Master's by Research degree at the Queensland University of Technology here in Brisbane in Australia. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is either come out of the thesis that I wrote, which is around work-life borders, and how we manage the porosity or the strength of those borders between work and life, and also some of the rest of the academic literature that I based a lot of my thesis on as well. So everything we're talking about today, there's some theoretical grounding or academic grounding behind some of the things we're talking about. In the first half of the session, we're going to talk about some of that theory and kind of set the scene, and in the second half, we're going to talk about how you can use Microsoft 365 itself to help better manage those borders between work and life, and ultimately get on top of things so you can achieve your professional goals at work, hitting your KPIs and achieving your bonus or however you're measured at work, but also those personal goals you have as well. So like getting your lunch break back, getting out of the office on time when we went to the office, or generally, working with your family and making the most of the time you have with your family and friends outside of work as well. If you wanted any more details on the thesis itself, I'll just throw myself into the corner for a second. Again, it's all downloadable from the QUT ePrint site if you wanted to go into any more detail behind any of the stuff that we'll talk about today. Quick agenda of what we're going to cover. First of all, we'll talk about the benefits and the consequences of distributed work. I like to call it distributed work, not remote work or work from home, because really we're just distributed. That's all it is. We're just doing work from different locations of where we are. We're going to talk about defining work-life borders, and there's more than just one work-life border. And if you go into the literature behind this, there's really good reasons why we should think about different borders between work and life. So, that will give you the language to kind of articulate what you're thinking with your employer or with your team or with your family and friends. We'll talk about how you can successfully transition across that border between your work life and your home life and vice versa, and how you can manage those transitions to work for you as opposed to against you. And then finally, we'll talk about tips and tactics that you can implement in Microsoft 365 to help maintain that border strength as well. So throughout the workshop today, what I'm going to ask you all to use the Q&A feature in Microsoft Teams live events. So if you haven't used the Q&A feature before, there's a little, it looks like a little conversation box with a question mark in it that you'll see on your screens. So what I'd love you to do, we're going to do this a couple of times during the session. If you could just open up that Q&A box. And what I'd love you to do is just share with me through the Q&A box, what are the benefits that you've found from having to work from home the last little while? So maybe in the last 8 to 10 weeks, you've been forced by your employer to work from home because the office has been locked down. Maybe you're in a jurisdiction or area where the government's forced you to work from home. You've had to socially isolate or things like that. What are the benefits that you've found from having to work from home over the last little while? What I'd love to do, I'm going to share with you some of the benefits that I've discovered working from home over the last little while, as you put your answers in there as well. So some of the benefits of distributed work are definitely things like reducing your commute time. So I have a great 45-second commute at the moment from bed to the office where I am. In temporary office I've got set up in my garage at the moment. There's no longer a need to get into a car, drive to a train station, then sit on the train for 35 minutes to get into the city to go to a place where I need to work. The outcome of that is I'm basically saving 2 hours a day of what was my personal time, which now can be either applied to work or can be applied to things that I want to apply it to, like family or friends. Another benefit is that it allows me to better balance both my personal goals and my professional goals as well. So I've got more time in the day, or I can switch between achieving personal goals and professional goals throughout the day much easier, because I'm in a space where it's easy to make that switch or make that transition from work to non-work. Now, unlike when I'm stuck in a physical office, when you almost need to be on work pretty much all the time because you're present in a work office. There's definitely a great opportunity to reduce the impact on the environment and reduce the amount of carbon footprint that you have, the emissions that you have in terms of your travel as well. I know for a fact within our organisation, the biggest contributor to carbon output for our organisation is air travel. About 96% of our carbon impact is resulting on getting on aeroplanes and flying to see customers or flying to see other people. And because of the distributed work and the lockdown we've gone into, our air travel has basically gone to zero, or it has gone to zero over the last couple of months, which has a significant impact not only on our environmental impact, but also the impact on the finances of the business and our customers as well. And it's also allowed a bit more focus too, so we can dive a little bit deeper, get a little bit more intensely focused on the work that we're doing, because we can create spaces away from potentially the distractions of work that help us do that as well. Now, it's obviously a double-edged sword, because we might be able to focus a lot more, but there's also a lot more opportunities for distraction coming in too, which is interesting. Right, the next thing I'd love you to do, again, if you've got that Q&A box open, is open up the Q&A box again and maybe share with me, what are some of the consequences that you've found from having to work from home? What are the things that maybe haven't worked as well, or you didn't think would be roadblocks or issues when you started to work in a more distributed way? There's a couple of 4 things I could think about here that really, I guess, are kind of really interesting consequences to discuss, or things to talk about in this session. The first one is this idea of work intensification and extensification. Now, I don't know if you're like me or like many of my peers or colleagues that I've talked to, but a lot of people feel that now we've been in this pandemic world, we've been doing a lot more distributed work. We feel like we're doing a lot more work. Like we're joining a lot more meetings, we're joining a lot more calls. We're getting more work done. We feel like we're busier than ever, because it's like all this stuff's at our fingertips. The intensity of work has definitely increased for a lot of people. But on the flip side of that, the hours that we work have also increased as well. So we find a lot of people have gone from working pretty structured, like 9 o'clock in the morning to 5 p.m. in the afternoon hours. They might be starting a little bit earlier, or they might be like the work might be going a little bit later because they're focused on things and they don't have the traditional signals to say they need to stop work. And one of the interesting things from the literature that we look at is that a lot of people who have the advantage of being able to work flexibly or work in a distributed way or work from home feel like there's this obligation of reciprocity where they need to pay their employer back for the additional flexibility they've been given. And recently, in a lot of people who are grateful to have a job at the moment because of some of the economic impacts of the pandemic are feeling this obligation in some cases to do more for the employer and go above their contract of what they actually need to do. So there's definitely this work intensification, we're doing more work, and extensification, we're doing more hours, occurring in quite a lot of places. There's potential for a disconnection from the social networks that you have in your office as well. And this is really important in terms of, how do you make sure you remain visible and, you're recognized for the work that you're doing in your organization when you can't be there to be seen to be doing the work. So there's, definitely an opportunity here, and we've seen it in a lot of people that have worked remotely in the past, where you might miss out on opportunities for promotions or miss out on opportunities to for advancement in your organization because you haven't built that social capital with the different people in the organization that help influence a lot of those decisions. So there's definitely that disconnection can be a big issue. There's absolutely additional costs that are borne on individuals in terms of distributed work. We just got our power bill today, and we saw our power bill has gone up by about $100 over the last 3 months because we've been doing a lot more work at home, both myself and my wife and my kids doing school from home as well. We're using more power. We've had to buy some additional equipment to make it work. We've had to set up a second office at home because we only had like 1 office space set up at home, not 2. So there's lots of additional costs that had to be borne by people that have started to work in a distributed way as well. And then finally is the last one, which is really the topic of the presentation today, which is we've started to see weakened borders between work and life. So some of the strong borders we might have had previously between work and non-work. So when you go to the office, that means you're in work mode, and when you're not at the office, you're not in work mode. Like some of those really strong, obvious border strength like that. Like some of that started to disappear and weaken because you're only, I'm here. There's a door to my right, which is about 1.5 meters away, and as soon as I go through that door, I'm out of work mode and into family mode as well. So there's really interesting consequences that start happening when we think about distributed work as well. There's lots of great positives that come with it, but some consequences we need to consider too. So let's dive into that last one a little bit more specifically and talk about work-life borders. And when we talk about work-life borders, there's a couple of concepts we need to think about first. There's a great paper, if you're interested in reading academic literature, which I know many of you will not be, but if you want to get into the detail behind this, by Clark from around the year 2000. And in that paper, she talked about a concept called work-family border theory. And in that paper, she talks about the 3 different types of borders that we have between our work lives and our family lives, or the work lives we have and our non-work lives, right? And if you think about your own how you differentiate between work and life at the moment, you could probably recognize some of these borders as well. So the 3 borders are the physical border, the temporal border, and the psychological border. So we don't just treat it as one big border, and you're either in work or you're not in work. There's nuance to this. And I think when you start thinking about these concepts and how it relates to your own practice, I think you'll see the differences as well. So if we think about the physical border is like the example I'd love to give is like, the sliding opening doors, the glass doors you have in your office when you go into the office, when you're in the office. It's almost like a really physical representation of a boundary between work and non-work. As soon as you pass through those doors, you're in that physical workspace, you've crossed over that physical border. When you leave the office at the end of the day, you've crossed over that physical border again out of the traditional workplace and back into your normal family life as well. So that's an example of a physical border. A temporal border is like a time-based border between work and life. So if you have, for example, a lot of first-line workers or blue-collar workers have really, really strong temporal borders because, at the end of the workday at 4:30 in the afternoon, there's a big siren that goes off on the work site and everyone just drops tools and walks away. They've hit that temporal border, which is 4:30 in the afternoon, and work just stops no matter what they're doing at the time. We have our own temporal borders, and especially as knowledge workers, we probably have a little bit more control over our temporal border, so we can sometimes dictate the hours that we work to some extent. So we've got this, this time-based border we could think about work as well. And finally, the third border is a psychological border, and this is the kind of the border in our minds, like when we're thinking about work and not thinking about work. And I know a lot of us would recognize that we might be not physically in a workplace. We might not be within the core hours that we normally work. We're not within the temporal borders of the workplace, but psychologically we might have crossed over that border and be thinking about work on the weekends or late at night or things like that. So when we break it up into these 3 different types of borders, it helps us kind of define the borders that we have between work and non-work, and we can think about how we can put in some strategies and tactics to help us better manage these borders as well. So what I'd love to do is give you a few examples of some borders that you can think about. So here's an example of a really weak physical border. And this is that door that I was talking about just before, which is just to my right-hand side here, between the garage where I'm working and the rest of the house. Now, this is a weak physical border because it's permeable. So my kids who are 10 years old, they just finished school, they could come running through that door and kind of engage with me in work. Or similarly, I could walk out there and engage with them during the workday as well. So example, a weak one with the door open like that. Now, if I wanted to make that a stronger physical border, all I need to do is just close that door. And this is almost like a signal that I can give to my family to say, look, I'm focused on work at the moment. I don't want those interruptions, but also I don't want to have the tendency to want to go and engage with my family as well at the same time. Example of how do you structure your workspace so you have a border like this, a physical border, whether it's a door or some other mechanism that you have to create a physical barrier between yourself and the things that are happening around you. Now, remembering that a strong border doesn't necessarily mean it's a better border, just to be really clear. Like the way you want to work with your borders is you want to control them how you want them to work for you and the goals that you're trying to achieve. So sometimes during the day, you want a really strong border. Like example right now, while I'm delivering a presentation to people around the world, I want to have a strong physical border here so no one comes in to the conversation as I'm talking to you right now. But when I'm finished this this session, I'm kind of waiting for my next session later tonight, I'll have the door open. I'll have a weak physical border because I still want to engage with my family during that time as well. So again, stronger doesn't necessarily mean better. It's just knowing how you can define these borders and how you can control the strength or otherwise to work for you at the time. Another good example is, having a weak temporal border. I'm absolutely 100% guilty of this at the moment. I've been sleeping in a lot, like this cat on the picture here, and I'm not necessarily working as structured hours as I used to be doing when we weren't in this pandemic mode or in COVID mode. So I'm kind of have a very loose, very weak temporal border at the moment, where I'll work when I have my energy at the highest. I'll take advantage of the flexibility that we've got now to kind of do things throughout the day and throughout the evening, and not have to do everything within the confines of when I'm expected to be in an office, or within the hours of when I'm expected to be in an office as well. So that's an example of a very weak temporal border that I have at the moment, which I'm using to my advantage. I'm getting more sleep. I'm getting more work done when I can be focused with my energy during the day as well. Now, a much stronger temporal border would be if I was working to the clock. So I say, right, I'm going to work from 9 a.m. till 4:36 in the afternoon. I'm going to have a 45-minute lunch break in the middle of the day. And then irrespective of what's going on, I'm going to stop my work at that particular time and move on with things. Now, again, there's no right or wrong one, which is better, a stronger or a weaker border. It's about making it work for you and making it work for your family, your professional goals, and your personal goals as well. So sometimes during the week, you might want to have a very weak temporal border because there's lots of other things inside your life you want to do. You want to go for a run when the weather's good outside, or go for a ride when the weather's good outside, and take advantage of or earlier in the morning, things like that. There's other times though when you really want to focus on your work, and you might have some other engagements that are occurring outside of your core hours where you really need to stop work. So that's when you can have a really strong temporal border to kind of make sure you can do that as well. And then finally, the last one is the psychological border. The weak psychological border. And like, we have in our pockets the #1 device that can absolutely weaken the psychological border between work and life, and that's our mobile phones. And particularly the notifications that we get through mobile phones, which continuously can draw us not only into our work lives when we're off work, but also the flip side, it can draw us into our personal lives when we're trying to be in work mode as well. Definitely a double-edged sword too. So the phone can absolutely weaken that psychological border significantly, meaning that it's you can spend hours, if not days, potentially in some cases, thinking about work when you don't want to be thinking about work, or being consumed by things happening in your non-work life when you really need to be focusing on work as well. So things we can do, like to create stronger psychological borders, is we can set aside some time or some space where we can completely remove ourselves from any thoughts of work, or put strategies and tactics in place to help us remove thoughts of work out of our minds very, very quickly. And we'll talk about a few of those in the tactics that we can use for Microsoft 365 in a little while as well. One of the things that we'd love to talk about here is, excuse me, just about to cough, one sec. Is transitioning across borders, so transitioning from that work life to that family life, or work life to non-work life, and vice versa. The people that have the best control over their borders between work and life normally put in place some kind of transition ritual, or like something they do to help them get into the mode of work, and kind of have a signal that says, hey, I'm going into work, or I'm going away from work, I'm going into my family life, or I'm going away from my family life back into work. And some of the things you can do, as an example, a lot of people will dress for work. Now, if I throw myself back up on the screen for a second, you'll see that I'm not really all that dressed for work. I'm in a t-shirt and a hoodie. I've been working pretty casual at the moment. But a lot of our customers have, we've seen people come on video calls still wearing a suit, just like they would if it was going into a meeting with a customer, right? So we're seeing a lot of people use this dress for work ritual as a signal to go, hey, I'm going into work mode. It might be still working from my kitchen or from my office, my home office, but I'm going to be dressed for work so I can get into that mode of how I want to do things. There might be another example where you leave that space and you turn the light off, or you close the door, and that's the signal to say, look, I'm done with work for the day. I've turned the lights off. I've put the computer to sleep. That's my signal, the transition ritual I'm going through to walk away. If you leave the computer on and you leave the lights on, there's probably it's a weaker border between the two. You're probably more likely to be dragged back into work because it's nice and easy to transition across that border again. My favorite example is, some people actually, they'll drive around the block and, get into the car and almost, imagine a commute. Just to get out of the office, or go drive and get a takeaway coffee or a takeaway cup of tea, and then come back to their home office to do their work as well. And there's some really basic transition rituals that we could think about as well. Some of these you may or may not be guilty of. I know there's been some mornings when I've been, coming into work and I've rushed from bed to get into the work mode here, and I haven't really had a strong transition ritual where I may have forgotten to brush my teeth first thing in the morning, but I've definitely got it done by mid-morning or lunchtime when I remember it. And like some people, even down to having a shower and things like that. So like these are the rituals you can put in place to help you transition between those two modes as well. Again, there's a great paper by Ashford, Kreiner, and Fugate from about 2000, where if you want to go into more detail around those border work and those border transitions and how they apply to your work-life borders. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about how we can control border strength within Microsoft 365, and how can we use the tools within Microsoft 365 to help manipulate these borders to our advantage. Whether we want them to be stronger, we want them to be weaker, we want to be in control of them one way or the other. So how do we either maintain border strength or control that border strength across the physical, temporal, and psychological borders? How do we maintain and build that social capital so we can remain engaged with our employer and with the opportunities they might have within our employer as well? And ultimately, how do we manage expectations with the people that we work with around us? We know from our research that the number one thing that will make or break the ability for people to work, in a distributed way, long term, in a sustainable way, is about being able to clearly manage the expectations of your manager, but also managing the expectations of the people around you and being on the same page. So let's talk about how we can do all that. Again, if you have the Q&A there and you're open, feel free to drop in some of your ideas about how you could use Microsoft 365 to control the borders between work and life within your understanding of how you can use Microsoft 365 today. But what we'll do, we'll talk about a few examples right now of how you can do that. So for example, if you wanted to maintain that physical border strength, and particularly that physical border, Microsoft 365 gives you the ability with the devices that you can connect to and things like that to almost take your work anywhere, which means that quite a lot of us have experienced over the last little while that there hasn't been too much of a negative impact of not being in the office, because we can use Microsoft 365 services like Microsoft Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive and Yammer and the rest of the tools in the platform to help us connect with all the information that we need at work, all the documents, presentations, spreadsheets, etc. We connect with our colleagues and our peers and our customers and our suppliers and everything like that using Microsoft 365. So the flexibility of Microsoft 365 means that we can take our work where we can make it work for us. So finding a space within your house where you have the ability to control some kind of physical barrier around it. Don't just automatically set up on the kitchen table, which is in a common space where there's a thoroughfare of people coming in and out throughout the day. See if you can find a space where you can have a little bit of control around that physical border in particular. Now, the more permanent the border, the better. So if it's actually a room with a physical door, that's sometimes better than sitting at the end of a room or in the corner of a room where there might be other people around. But just try and find that space. I recognize that in some people's homes where you might be living in a small apartment or with lots of people and lots of family, it can be difficult to find those spaces. But the flexibility of Microsoft 365 means we can take that work to where it should work best for us. The other thing we recommend is that to maintain your border strength, try and do as much as possible through text first. So don't necessarily try and jump onto a video call or try and solve everything with an audio call to start with. Try and do everything what we call asynchronously. So do some text, whether it's a message in Yammer, in a community in Yammer, whether it's a conversation in Teams about a particular document, whether you're writing your thoughts in a document in the first place or putting your thoughts into a presentation to share with others. But try and do it all through text first. And the reason why we say that is if we try and do it through synchronous communication all the time, so on face-to-face video calls like this or constantly in instant messaging, we actually lose a lot of control over our day, because a lot of other people within our day start to control whether or not we need to be in work mode or not. If I need to be on a phone call at 4 o'clock in the afternoon because we have a particular discussion, that means that there's a really clear reason for me to be in work mode at that time when I could be in non-work mode if I was having my own choice over it. So try and do things by text first and see how much you can do asynchronously, where you can pose conversations, pose questions, pose comments, share documents, share information, work together on information asynchronously. So you can be in control of your workday and in control of your temporal and psychological borders at the same time. Fundamentally, what you want to try and do is reduce the number of meetings that you have. But if you do have to have a meeting, maximize the impact of those meetings. Turn video on and things like that to try and engage with people, because it'll help build that social capital as well. Now, to maintain I guess your border strength, that psychological border. So when you think about work, there's some great tools you can use within Microsoft 365 to do that. Now, generally, what I'd say is you need to think about your notifications and try and turn off as many of those unnecessary notifications as possible. If you're using Microsoft Teams on the mobile app in Microsoft Teams, there's a great feature called Quiet Hours, where you can see here from a screenshot on my phone, I've got quiet hours set from 7 o'clock in the evening till 7 o'clock in the morning. And my quiet days are Saturday and Sunday. So I won't get any notifications on my phone for Teams throughout those particular times. Now, if I wanted to, change that border sometime, if I wanted to work late or something like that, I can still turn those quiet hours off. If I want to, I have control over that border, but I've kind of set a line in the sand saying this is when I want this. I don't want my phone interrupting my non-work time with these thoughts of work as well. Another example of maintaining border strength, if you want to go completely off the grid and turn off all the notifications from your phone, don't be afraid to use flight mode on your mobile phone to drop the connectivity to the data networks and things like that. Because what that means is that no notifications are going to come through. And it also reduces the tendency of you to want to go into Outlook and check your emails and things like that as well, because you're not seeing any new emails coming in, not getting that dopamine hit of new content or new things, new questions that need to be answered, or new conversations starting to occur and wanting to engage with them. So you can absolutely tune out from a lot of conversations simply by disconnecting from the grid that way. Excuse me. If you want to go even deeper, I've got an Android phone, so I've got a lot more ability to control specific notifications if I wanted to as well, coming up on my phone too. So just go into the application settings and try and really dictate exactly what notifications you want to hear or what notifications you want to see. You don't need to do that just on Teams on your mobile phone. You should be doing that across all the applications you have. You should be turning off, if you want to really be in control of this, turn off the notifications in Outlook when you get a new message. You don't want to have that little unread, mailbox sitting in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You don't want to have that little toast appear on your screen when the new message comes in. Turn off all those distractions so you can focus on your work, and then you can choose when you want to engage in those particular conversations at the time, either during work time or after it as well. One of my favorite examples of maintaining border strength, particularly when you're working from home, if you want to set yourself a bit of a deadline to say, look, work needs to stop at this particular time, don't be afraid to pull out the charger from your laptop at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because you know that your laptop's only got 2.5 hours of juice left in it. So you basically set yourself a countdown clock to say when you need to get the work done. And once the power runs out, you obviously can't do anything physically with that device anymore unless you plug that charger back in. So using this as a little tactic you can use to kind of set that time for you really well to close off that border. Just it means that you can, it gives you a constraint to actually get a lot more work done. You'll find you're probably more productive knowing that you've got this timeline coming towards you where you need to get the work done before the battery actually runs out. Now, one other thing that, from a psychological border point of view, is that sometimes we think about work when we don't want to think about it. Like ideas pop into our heads late at night or over the weekend or things like that. There's one advantage of having that phone in your pocket is that you can actually use it to dump the ideas out of your head and into your work life in some way, shape or form, so you can refer to those ideas down the track and not have to think about them over the weekend. So using things like to do on your phone, so you can, if there's something you go, hey, I have to do that on the next week. If maybe it's Saturday night, you're thinking about something else, and this idea pops into your head. Just crack open your phone, go to to-do, add a new to-do to your list, and then put the phone away. That idea's gone out of your mind into a work, into work mode in your work device somewhere else, and you don't have to think about it, and it'll try to remember it over the weekend until you get to Monday. You could do that with To-Do. You could use that with the OneNote app or other note-taking tools. So you can get those ideas out of your mind and somewhere where you can recall them when you need to, when you're actually in work mode as well. In terms of trying to maintain or build that social capital in your workplace, so how can you remain connected to work? There's definitely ways to do this, but I think ultimately the key thing here is to try and make your work as visible as possible. So a lot of people might have heard of the idea of working out loud, or documenting your work as you go, things like that. So you can use tools like Yammer and Teams to do that. So, make sure that if you're working on a really complex problem, a problem shared is a problem solved. Making yourself a bit more vulnerable and sharing what you're working on, being transparent with your work. Documenting things as they happen within teams so the rest of your team can understand exactly what's going on. Particularly when we're distributed teams, we want to usually over communicate some of this context that we miss out on because we don't see each other face to face. We don't see the piles of work on your desk that we walk past your desk every day because we don't see your desk at all. So this over communication and this documentation of work as you go is really important. You could consolidate some of the lessons you learn into news articles that you post on SharePoint or things like that to share with the rest of your team. It could be a Yammer post. It could be a session where you get a few of your colleagues together on a video call and share some of the things that you've been working on and some of the challenges you've solved through work as well. One thing though here we kind of recommend, we talked about it a little bit earlier, is the value of having your video on in meetings when you're working distributed. Now, being able to convey body language, being able to see, connect with people face to face or eye to eye on video calls when we don't have the ability to do that face to face is really important. You don't need to do it all day, every day. But generally, throughout the week, when you've got opportunities to engage with people, it's going to be far better to be visible, to be on camera so people can see you and still recognize that you're contributing to be part of the organization or part of the team as well. You don't want to be sort of sitting in the shadows, kind of out of mind and out of sight while you're doing this work as well. Now, other things you could do is use tools like Icebreaker within Microsoft Teams to help you connect with other people that are working in a distributed way too. So the Icebreaker bot, which is an add-in which you can build into Microsoft Teams, takes a little bit of technical nous to set it up, but once it's set up, it pretty much runs by itself. But what it'll do is randomly connect you with other people within your team. So you could set up a time to have a chat and get to know them a little bit better as well. Take some of the anxiety out of, trying to, reach out to someone that you might not have talked to before to start to build a conversation with or a relationship with at work. Then one other thing is we want to try and replicate some of that unproductive time that we have in the workplace as well. Now, depending on the studies that you look at, most people are productive in the office somewhere between 2 and 4.5 hours a day of the 7 hours or 8 hours a day they spend in the office. And the rest of the time is either it's maybe quieter time, thinking time, or just in conversations with people about things that are happening in their personal lives. Conversations around sport, family. Conversations that might happen in the lunchroom or the kitchenette or around the water cooler. When we're working in a distributed way, we miss out on some of these opportunities to connect with each other as human beings. So it's a really great opportunity for you, whether you're a leader of a team or member of a team, to structure some unproductive time into your team's day. Now, it doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be all day, it doesn't have to be every day. Maybe a couple of times throughout the week where you just get on a call together and just talk about what you're going to do on the weekend or what you got done on the weekend, things like that. One great strategy we've seen done that we use ourselves is we have a team meeting every week. And for the first 10 minutes of that team meeting, the first agenda item is not really talking about work at all, but it's getting everyone on the call to share with each other what is the one personal win they had this week and the one professional win they had this week. Again, so we can hear about some of the great work that people are doing, makes them visible, and we can see the impact of what they're doing. But we also get to know them as individuals. We're going to hear what knitting pattern that someone did this week or what they did in the garden over the weekend or things like that. So you get to really know people and still remain connected to them as well, which is really important. The other thing to do is try and celebrate leave. So encourage people to take time off because one of the things working in a distributed way, sometimes you don't feel like you can take leave or you're not in a good position to take leave. And I think we all should still be taking leave from work, even if we're still staying at home while we're taking that leave as well. So don't forget to take leave and celebrate when other people take the time off, and don't try and interrupt that work as well. Try and defend that border with absolute sanctity when people take time off. Don't try to engage with them when they're on leave as well. Also, one other thing we can think about here is how do we manage expectations with each other? So if we're going to work in a team, if we're going to use Teams to communicate or collaborate with each other, what are the expectations we're placing on each other in terms of how quickly I'll respond to things? How quickly will I respond to a message that you might post? How are we going to use things like the notifications and mentions in Teams to try and get each other's attention? The app mention in Teams is really powerful because it can absolutely break through both, all three of these borders, the psychological, temporal, and physiological, psychological border, by getting someone's attention off their mobile phone. So we want to be really clear about when we want to use these notifications to grab people's attention and when we don't want to. And as long as your team's all on the same page, it should generally work. Yeah, so one of the things we recommend is, don't use the @mention in a team unless you want me to do some kind of time-bound important action that needs to take place. Don't just @mention me because you've replied to a message. Don't just @mention me because you want me to read something. Only mention me when you want me to really, really do something. Otherwise, just expect me to read the message when I read the message, because I'm in control of my workday and how I'm going to work best in this particular situation. So think about the roles those signals play in Microsoft 365 and in Microsoft Teams in particular. What does high importance mean? How often are we going to check this channel for different messages? How are we going to use the general channel? We're just going to talk about how we work together, or is it going to be the social chit chat channel? All those kinds of things, those principles you need to really agree on. Now you can document them as a tab in Teams if you wanted to. So you could create a little Word document and document them in there. You could document them in the shared OneNote notebook you have with the team, those kinds of things as well. But you want to all be on the same page in terms of how you're going to use the spaces in particular to help you not only get your work done, but manage those borders as well. Now you can also proactively engage with your manager via the scheduled one-on-ones you might have within Teams to manage your progress and roadblocks and things like that. One of my favorite use cases for Microsoft Teams, and a lot of people kind of balk at this at the first when I mention it. My favorite team and the favorite size I have for a team is 2 members, and that is 1 for you and 1 for your manager. So basically a team which is just about you and your employment relationship with your manager, like either your direct report or your manager themselves. We call it an employee experience team. And it's a team where you can talk about, not only can you schedule your one-on-ones and have an ongoing conversation about things in between your one-on-ones and track your tasks and activities that are coming out of your one-on-ones, but you can have a channel focused purely on learning and development, a channel purely focused on things that are broken that need to be fixed. You can have a really, really transparent and productive working relationship with your manager, and you can consolidate that all into a team. So, using that employee experience model, whether you just type things into the conversation and keep engaged with your manager over time to make sure you're on top of things and make sure that problems are getting fixed, both from your side and from your manager's side. But also documenting stuff potentially in the OneNote notebook that comes with that as well, kind of that shared meeting note space that you have there. The beauty of a employee experience team is, say you moved on to a different role within an organization, you can take that with you to your next manager as well. So you can take that context and all that history that came with you into that new role as well, which is pretty handy when you're shifting between different silos in an organization. And then last but not least, the one thing we know from all of this stuff is that how you manage the expectations of others, how you manage your expectations on yourself, how you perceive the expectations of others, probably has the biggest impact of whether or not you'll be successful in the way that you manage these borders between work and non-work. So if you're not having conversations with your team and with your manager, if you're not having conversations with your family or friends that engage with you in these different spaces, you need to start having those conversations to be really clear about either their expectations or your expectations as well. If there's a mismatch or misalignment between those things, that's where you see issues start to occur. Borders definitely weaken when you don't want them to be weak, or they strengthen when you don't want them to be strong. And ultimately, we want to be in control of those borders as much as possible, not other people around us. So in terms of some next steps you can think about off the back of this presentation, I think we all have a great opportunity over the next little while to rethink what our new normal is. A lot of us have been thrown in brute force into work from home or distributed work for the very first time. Some of us have been doing it for a while, but now everyone else is in a distributed work from home mode as well, so it's a little bit different for us too. But we want to consider, what does that new normal look like? We don't necessarily want to go back to how we always used to do things. How do we take advantage of all those great advantages that we now have in front of us because we can work in this distributed way, and try and avoid some of those consequences that came along as well? So I think in my mind, and a lot of conversations that we're having with our customers and with our colleagues and peers, is that quite a lot of people who have never worked remotely or never worked distributed before now see the benefits of it. A lot of managers now see that it's possible to actually be productive in this mode of work. So we have people saying, well, I don't want to go back to the office 5 days a week. I might only want to be in the office 2 days a week and then work from home the other 3 days of the week. So you need to consider what that new normal is for you and have conversations with your team and with your manager to articulate what that is. I know it's different around the world, but within Australia in particular, where I'm coming from, within Australia, as part of the Fair Work Act, which is a federal act of parliament, you have a right to request flexible work arrangements with your employer, and they have to actually consider them properly. You don't have a right to flexible work, but you have a right to request it and have that actually considered with your employer. So that may be different across the world, but I know there's definitely similar legislative instruments in different jurisdictions around the place that can help you navigate that as well. You need to consider the 3 borders between work and life and how you're going to control them to achieve your personal and professional goals. Remember, it's not about just having the strongest borders possible. You want to be in control of whether they're weak or strong to best suit the way you're trying to achieve things, help you get your job done, help you, be a great family member or a great friend or anything like that. How do you achieve those personal and professional goals? By controlling that border strength in the way that you want it to be. Think about how you can reduce the number of meetings that you're involved with. Like going back to back from video conferences all day, every day, which a lot of us have been doing recently, will just drain you over time and will burn you out very, very quickly. And means you're actually going to do a lot more work than what you're doing before, that work extensification we talked about right at the start. If you do have to do video meetings or meetings in general, try to reduce the number as much as possible. Say no to meetings if there's no value for you actually participating in it. And if you do have to schedule meetings, make sure you're scheduling a good half-hour block between the meeting and the next one, so you've got time to stop, reflect, document what came out of that meeting, so you can, act like a journalist, document your work as you go and make it visible as well. Then ultimately, you want to try and leverage the power of Microsoft 365 to help you work in this world. We've only touched on a few of the different features of Microsoft 365 that can help you do that today. And there's plenty of other things you can do with Office 365 in general to help you either strengthen or weaken those borders as you want to make work as agilely as well as it can be for you as well. So we talked about a lot of concepts here today. There's a few of the things we talked about, in particular, some of those border control tactics around notifications and things like that, and how to set principles and teams. We go into a lot more detail about those in a book that we wrote recently. Some of you may have seen this book. It's called Adopt and Embrace Microsoft Teams, a manager's guide to communication, collaboration, and coordination with Microsoft Teams. Within that, we talk about how to control those notifications. We talk about how to structure a team to manage your energy throughout the day, manage your focus throughout the day, and things like that. So if you want to go into any deeper in terms of how you can structurally set up teams in particular to help you maintain those borders and control those borders between work and life, there's a lot of great content in there, and some worked patterns, including that employee experience pattern I talked about earlier, that can help you with that. Coincidentally, we wrote that book entirely in Microsoft Teams, completely distributed. So if you want to see a real example of how distributed work and people managing those work-life borders themselves can produce some great content, here's a great example of a real-world project where no one met face-to-face for the entire time. Everyone worked from home basically the entire time, and we produced some great content as we went. It's available on ebook, on Kindle, and in an audiobook recently as well. It just got released on Audible if you want to listen to my voice some more. So with that, I'd love to thank you all for, your participation in the session today. Thank you for joining. If you've got any questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A now, and I'll try and answer them as we go. One other quick comment though is I'm doing another session in about an hour and 18 minutes time as part of the virtual marathon. And that's diving deeper into how to design the perfect team in Microsoft Teams. So if you're kind of struggling with questions like, how many teams should I create? How many channels should I have in my team? When is the right time to create a team or not create a team? The framework that we use at 10Ps, which we talk about in that book as well, can definitely help you structure teams to be as effective as possible. Again, helping you manage those work-life borders as well. So with that, thank you very much for your attention and your time today, and I'll answer any of the questions in the live event Q&A as they come in as well. Thanks very much and have a great rest of your day or evening.
Great, thanks, Paul. That's a brilliant presentation. I must say it affects all of us as well. I'll go one of the books which I had about a few years ago when I started working from home, and absolutely spot on. It's almost like you're not forced to work, but you need to work to be productive. That works in your way, and yeah, great session. Thanks for that. Just looking at my Q&A, and I haven't got any questions yet, but as you said as well, so attendees, please feel free to post your questions now. And if you think of something later or after this session, then please do hang out in the community zone as well, and which you can access through the website, m365virtualmarathon.com. But yeah, I think with that, just like to say thank you, Paul, for taking your time and your efforts in delivering this presentation, and hope you enjoy the rest of the session, the conference, as well as the attendees.
Awesome. Thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Paul.